He rejected every woman in Wyoming. That's what people said about him in low voices at grocery stores and louder voices at diners along the highway. They said he was too proud, too cold, too broken. They said money had turned his heart into stone. They said he would rather dine alone in his massive ranch house than risk letting anyone step close enough to see the cracks beneath his tailored suits. His name was Daniel Harper, and in a state where the wind never seemed to stop blowing, he was known as the man who wouldn't bend. Daniel owned more land than most people could see in a single day's drive. Rolling pastures stretched beyond the horizon, horses thundered across open fields, and the mountains stood like silent witnesses to his solitude. He had built an empire from cattle, oil leases, and relentless discipline. At 42, he had everything money could buy, except the one thing he no longer believed in: love. Over the years, women had tried. Some were drawn to his wealth. Some were intrigued by the mystery. Others genuinely believed they could melt the frost from his guarded heart. They attended charity galas on his arm, walked beside him at community events, and smiled for photographs under the Wyoming sky. And one by one, he let them go. He never raised his voice. He never caused a scene. He simply ended things before they could begin. "I'm not the man you think I am," he would say. "You deserve more than I can give." The truth was simpler and far more painful. Years ago, when Daniel was still clawing his way toward success, he had fallen deeply in love. She believed in him when he had nothing but a worn-out truck and a dream bigger than his bank account. She stood beside him when banks turned him away and when drought nearly destroyed everything he owned. She was his reason to fight. And then one winter morning, black ice stole her from him on a lonely stretch of highway. After that, Daniel buried himself in work. He built higher fences, larger barns, stronger contracts, and thicker walls around his heart. To love again felt like tempting fate. To open himself again felt like daring the universe to strike twice. So he rejected every woman in Wyoming. Until the night the snowstorm came. The forecast had warned of heavy snowfall, but in Wyoming, snow was as common as sunrise. Daniel had finished reviewing accounts late into the evening and dismissed his staff early so they could get home safely. The ranch house felt cavernous and quiet, the kind of silence that echoed. Around midnight, the wind howled like a living thing. Snow slammed against the windows. The world beyond the glass disappeared into white chaos. Daniel was about to turn in when he heard something strange beneath the storm. A pounding. At first, he thought it was the wind. But it came again, sharp, desperate, unmistakable. He walked to the front door and pulled it open against the force of the gale. There, in the swirling snow, was a woman on her knees. Her coat was thin, soaked through. Snow clung to her dark hair and lashes. And in her trembling arms, she held a small child wrapped in a fraying blanket. "Please," she cried, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, I didn't know where else to go." Daniel froze. He had seen that face before. Not up close, but in town. She worked at the diner near the highway. He remembered because she had once refused an extravagant tip from him. "Take your child and come inside," he said, stepping aside. She staggered across the threshold, nearly collapsing as the warmth of the house met her frozen skin. Daniel shut the door and locked out the storm. The little boy couldn't have been more than 5. His lips were pale, his small hands stiff from cold. Daniel acted without thinking. He carried the child to the fireplace, wrapped him in thick wool blankets, and called his housekeeper, who lived in a cottage on the property, to prepare hot soup and dry clothes. Only then did he turn to the woman. "What happened?" he asked. Her name was Clara. Between shivering breaths, she explained. The landlord had evicted them that afternoon. She was behind on rent after missing shifts when her son fell ill. She had tried shelters in town, but they were full. The storm had closed the roads. She had nowhere left to go. "I know you don't know me," she said, tears carving warm paths down her frozen cheeks. "But I had to try. I couldn't let him freeze." Daniel felt something shift inside him, something he had kept locked away for years. He looked at the child, now dozing by the fire, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. "You'll stay here tonight," Daniel said quietly. "We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Clara lowered her head, overcome with relief. "Thank you," she whispered. The storm raged through the night, but inside the ranch house, something unexpected began to thaw. Morning brought clear skies and a world transformed into glittering white. Daniel watched from the window as the little boy, Eli, stood in awe of the endless snow-covered fields. "Have you ever seen horses up close?" Daniel asked him. Eli shook his head. Within an hour, Daniel had saddled the gentlest mare on the ranch. He lifted Eli carefully and walked beside the horse as it moved slowly through the snow. The boys' laughter rang out across the property, bright and unfiltered. Clara watched from the porch, her eyes filled with gratitude, and something else. Hope. Over breakfast, Daniel learned more about her. Clara had moved to Wyoming chasing stability after leaving an abusive relationship. She worked double shifts when she could. She had dreams of going back to school to become a nurse. But survival came first. Daniel listened. For the first time in years, he truly listened. Days turned into a week. The storm had damaged parts of town, and Clara couldn't return to work immediately. Daniel insisted they stay until things stabilized. He told himself it was temporary, a simple act of charity. But each evening, he found himself lingering at the dinner table longer than usual. Eli followed him everywhere, into the barns, across the fields, asking endless questions about cattle and tractors and why the mountains looked purple at sunset. Daniel answered them all. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence together, Eli looked up at him and asked, "Do you live here all alone?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes." "That must be lonely." The words struck harder than any accusation. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He walked the halls of his enormous house and realized how empty it truly was. Wealth had filled the rooms with art and antique furniture, but not with warmth. He thought about Clara, about the way she tucked Eli into bed, brushing his hair from his forehead with quiet tenderness. He thought about how she insisted on helping in the kitchen despite being a guest. He thought about the strength it must have taken to kneel in the snow and ask for help. He had spent years rejecting love out of fear, but fear had not protected him from loneliness. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He found Clara in the kitchen, studying job listings on her phone. "I have a proposition," he said. She looked up, wary. "The ranch needs a full-time operations manager for the guest lodge. Someone organized. Responsible. It comes with a salary, and the small cottage near the east pasture." Her eyes widened. "You'd offer that to me?" "I would." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they weren't from desperation. "I don't want charity," she said firmly. "It's not charity," Daniel replied. "It's an opportunity. For both of us." She accepted. Weeks turned into months. The cottage became a home. Eli started school in town. Clara transformed the guest lodge into a thriving retreat destination. Bookings increased. Staff morale improved. The ranch felt alive. And Daniel? He found himself laughing more. One evening, under a sky painted with 1,000 stars, he finally said what he had been holding back. "I was afraid," he admitted to Clara as they stood by the fence watching the horses. "Afraid that loving again meant losing again." Clara took a step closer. "Loving always carries risk," she said softly. "But so does living." He looked at her, really looked at her. Not as a woman who needed help, not as a temporary guest, but as someone who had walked through fire and snow and still chose hope. For years, he had rejected every woman in Wyoming because he believed his heart was beyond repair. But sometimes, healing doesn't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives on its knees in the snow, asking for a chance. Daniel didn't fall in love overnight. It was slower than that, deeper, built on shared breakfasts and quiet conversations and the sound of a child's laughter echoing across open land. When he finally took Clara's hand in town months later, people noticed. They whispered again, but this time, the whispers carried surprise instead of judgment. The man who had rejected everyone had chosen someone. Not because she chased his wealth, not because she demanded his attention, but because she showed him that strength and vulnerability can exist in the same heartbeat. Daniel learned that guarding your heart might prevent pain, but it also prevents joy. He learned that love isn't about replacing what was lost. It's about honoring it by daring to feel again. And Clara learned that asking for help isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the bravest act of all. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that no heart is too broken to heal and no winter lasts forever, then don't forget to support this channel. Stories like these are here to inspire you, to remind you that hope can rise even in the coldest moments of life. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And remember, Sometimes the greatest transformations begin when we least expect them. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.